story when I walk, boy.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to class today. Thank you for joining me, whether you're watching live or you're watching the recording. I appreciate you watching. I anticipate this being a short one today. I just want to kind of go through a few specific things in regard to your lab assignments for this module. Just making sure that we know them, making sure that we understand them, right, before you are to do the lab assignments. Labs for this module are due on Thursday. So you want to make sure you get those done, and then you get a break. You get a week off, right? I'm giving everybody spring break off, so we won't have anything next week. No live class, nothing due next week. And then when we return from the break on the week of the, I believe it is the 8th, we'll start working on GUIs. We'll do GUIs for a couple weeks, and then the remainder of the time will be you all working on your final projects. Right, so we're coming right down to the line here. And first of all, I just want to say that I'm sorry. I apologize for messing up posting the recording last week. I have no idea how I did that. I somehow took the post that I intended to post and put it in the completely wrong class and had no idea for a week. So I am sorry about that, but it's in the announcement post for this, with the link to this, so I'm sure you've all seen it by now. And today I want to just kind of do a really short a really short kind of live stream here. I just want to kind of talk about the lab assignment specifically, and just working on the lab assignment specifically. Like, one of them is pretty easy. And if you watched the live class we did last week, I kind of went off reservation a little bit and did a completely different demo that was a little more advanced that I didn't really intend to do. I just kind of saw a squirrel and got distracted, basically. You'd see a little bit about how that we do the small lab. Right, but in doing the small lab, essentially all that we're doing here is we're just taking and initializing an array in that sort of way, right? So if I take and I want to create an integer array, we put the data type, we put our square braces there to indicate that it is an array. We give it a name, probably something like numbers, and we can set it to a new integer array and give a value here in between those two square braces, and that's going to initialize an array with that many values, right? Like if you were in other programming languages, like for example, if I was in Python, I would say something like numbers equals 0 times 7, something like that, right? And that's how I do it if I was using Python, but we're not using Python. We're using Java, and but that's to show you, for those of you who took Python previously, like that gives you that connection there to how those two things relate and how you would do it in that, right? So if I were to print this out, I might want to use something like our enhanced for loop. So I could say something like for int number of numbers system.out.print the number. Right, and in this case, what we might also want to do here as well is put, say, number and concatenate that with a space. So that then we can see all of these zeros that are initialized in that array. Right, and there's some other stuff that we might want to do here, right? Like we could take this and we could expand it out and we can make it a little bit more interesting, or we can make our output a little bit more interesting. Right, like for example, if I wanted a comma between all of these, one, I would need to know the length of my array. And I'd want to know some other stuff as well, right? Like I'd want to know the index location of that array item. And I would want to know like where it is in terms of its location in the array. And if I wanted to do that and get some more information on my output here, it might be actually smarter to do something a little bit different here. Right, so if I were to, and let's change this up so we can kind of have this all together. Right, so I'm going to put this in its own value function. So we're going to make an integer array function. We're going to call it numbers, and we'll do everything in here. We do need to return, and we need to make sure that we're returning an array. So I will just slap that in there momentarily. Or actually, I'd probably need to say something like int x equals that, and then slap x in here momentarily. All right, so we know that it's an integer array. Just to complete our stub, right, so we can move forward. And so in this case, right, what I would want to do is I'd want to take this value. I could do something like this where I initialize the array. And I could say something like, int. And this is where I could do that and say something like int x equals a new int array with, let's say, 8 numbers. And we'll return x. Right, so now what we're doing is we're returning. We're going to call this function. We're going to create this 8 here. Like one of the things that we could do potentially, right? Like if we really wanted to make this a little bit fancier, and I do want to kind of add a little bit to this. So like what if we imported scanner, right? Import java.util.scanner. And what if we created a function, right? Like we could create a function, and we could say something like int x equals a new int array with, let's say, 8 numbers. And we'll return x. created a new scanner object at the system level. And what if we use that scanner object to populate an integer parameter for our function? Right, so instead what we might do here is we might say something like system.out.print interlength of array. Now, one of the things that we've done here is that I've put this scanner at the class level instead of the method level. And so since our main method is a static method, I would either need to use an object to access this scanner, or I would need to make the scanner static. So the easiest thing for me to do here would be to make the scanner static. Now I could take some variable, say int a, set it to n.nextInt. So now that I have a value, I could create an integer array variable that would hold the return from numbers with the a value in it. We'd need to name it, of course, right? So we'd call this, say, b, numbers with the a value in it. Now this is also non-static, so I would either need to make that static, or I'd need to make an object of the main class. So in this case, let's make an object of our main class. We do that by, since our class is called main, I'd want to make an object of that class, and I would do that by saying main, some sort of name, main object equals new main. And then I could use that object to access that non-static element like that, right? By attaching that object to the function call. All right, so now when I get that back, I can use that in a for loop. So I could say something like for int I equals 0, I is less than the length of the array. So we would say something like b.length I plus plus. And then inside of here, we could nest a conditional statement that would allow me to format my output in a specific way, right? So I could say something like if I, maybe something like does not equal b.length minus 1. Then I would want to system.out.print b at index location I, concatenated with comma space, else we would system.out.print b at index location I, right? And so all that's doing is that's going through each number in my array by index location. And it is, let me make sure I put my semicolon here before I forget it and get that error message. So here on line 14, what I'm doing is I'm checking to see if it is the last number in the array. And I could have inverted my logic here, right? And then just inverted what was done. If that was the case, we didn't. But if it is not, if I is not equal to b.length minus 1, we're going to put a comma and a space after our value. Right, so basically, as we kind of see our output here, imagine I just came in and put commas after all of these values. except for the last one. All right, and that's what that's what this part does. Is it says, well, don't put anything after that last one. Just put the last number in there for the last one. Right, and so that is a little more involved program that does a bit more here with our array, but in this instance, what I can do is I can make my array as big or as small as I want it and get a fairly well pretty printed output. Right, and there are other ways to do this. Yeah, but it's not really necessary. Right, and one of the smarter things that I might want to do here is I might want to put this in a void function, what we did here. I might want to put that into a void function instead of having it as a part of the main method. That way I can have it be a little more dynamic and a little more flexible, right? So if I made a void function, something like, void display array, we would need some sort of int array that had like, let's call it, what should we call it? N. And then we could just take this material here. And honestly, if I was smart, I'd call it B here. And that way I could reuse this B that's inside of here. So then I can basically take all of this, cut it out of here, put it in here. And now what I could do is, instead of doing this, I could just take it and I could put it into object display array. The ultimate result of object numbers here. And that should give me a nice little array. Let's put in a value. Let's put in a value of, say, 13. And there we get 13 zeros. And it's a little more modular, right? Like since it's its own function here now, it's a bit more modular than it was, meaning that I can use it for different purposes than I was doing here, right? Like now it's just going to display an array regardless of the array, right? So if I were to write another function that would allow me to say sort an array, then I could also pass the result off to that function that would allow me to display that array accordingly. Right, and when we're talking about sorting, we're really talking about kind of taking several things that we know, conditions, loops, and the concept of reassignment, and putting them all together toward one end, right? So if I wanted to make an array called, or if I wanted to make a function called sort, right, I could make an integer function and I could call it sort array, and we'd want to take in some sort of array. So we'll take in an integer array of a value. We'll take and create an integer array that's called, say, x. Just make it a stub here briefly so we don't get Java yelling at us while we talk about this and explain it, right? So basically what we're looking at when we're looking at a sort is we're looking at the ability to take an array, which, an array being a data structure of elements, and we are sorting it in such a way that we're basically putting it in order. All right, the easiest way to do that, and it's the one that I would probably expect you all to do, is something called a bubble sort. And that's what I kind of want you all to look at implementing when you're looking at this. Just because it is easy, right? Like it is way more simple than a lot of the other sorting algorithms that you may encounter. It's less efficient than a lot of the other ones, but it is possible. You know, one of the things that we're looking at when we're doing a bubble sort is we're basically taking the ability to take our array and we're looking at, you know, essentially a for loop like we've looked at previously, and we'd say something like, you know, for int I equals 0, I is less than the length of the array, right? Like a.length. And we increment I each time through our loop. So in this case, what we would want to do is we'd want to look at each item separately, but we'd also want to look at them in relation to the next one. So I'd actually want to do that again. And I want to say something like for int j equals 0, j is less than or equal to, j is less than a dot length minus 1, j plus plus. And we'll see where that minus 1 comes in here in a bit. Right, but essentially what I want to do is I want to look at a in my current index location. Right, so I basically want to say, you know, if a at index location j is greater than a at index location j plus 1. Right, so if the number that comes before is bigger than the number that comes after, well, we want to swap them around, right? And like in Java, one of the ways that we need to do that is we need to have a temporary variable. So I would need a temporary variable that would hold an integer briefly. That would be a j. Then I could take a j and set it equal to the value of a j plus 1. And then I could set the value of a j plus 1 equal to the temp value, right? Because we stored that value of aj into that temp value. Because at this point right here, that value is gone, right? We have that same value in aj that we have in aj plus 1. But since we stored that, we put that into our temporary variable here. Everything's cool. We still have it saved. And then when it's all said and done, we could just take and we can return a, because that's what we're changing there. We're just kind of changing it in place. And we have that, right? So at this time, like really all we would need to do, we could use that same object that we used earlier. And we can do obj.display array, and inside of that, we could run obj.sort array. And inside of that, we could just put an array, and we could put an unsorted array. Right, so maybe something like 3, 6, 2, 9, 4, 1, 14, 7. And what I might want to do here is actually put this into a variable. So we'd put it into, say, int to sort, and this should be an integer array, dot to sort, and set it equal to this value, like so. Then we could put to sort in here, and it'll be happy with me. Right, so now what that'll do is that'll sort my array. and it'll display it on the output the way that we want it to be displayed. So if we run this, it's still going to ask me to link to my array because I didn't remove that, but it's just not going to do anything with it this time. And there's my sorted array. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 9, 14. Right? It was out of sorts here. It's all sorted here. Right? And this just involves going through my list or going through my array, going through it as many times as I need to, flipping things around. For the purpose of this course, right, I just want to see you be able to implement a sorting algorithm. I don't necessarily want to know that you understand it, although it would be nice if you did. Right, just something to think about as you're approaching these assignments. And basically, you should have every tool in your toolbox now that you should be able to take care of these labs for Module 8 with no problem. So with that, I think we're going to wrap things up here. I think that's all that I want to be able to say, and that's all that I need to say. I said up front it was going to be a short one, and it is. So we'll wrap things up here. If you're watching the recording and you end up with any questions, please let me know. Send me an email or a Teams message. That's all that I have for you for today. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time, which will be for our live class. Will be not next week, but the next. Right? Next week will be a week off for spring break. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.